And now I'm delighted to introduce Elizabeth Chur, who is using her keen intellect, empathy, and capacity for deep conversations to strengthen our democracy, one voter at a time. Her book, The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers, is a labor of love based on years of experience phone banking, canvassing, and ballot carrying with thousands of voters in California's Central Valley and beyond. Elizabeth has trained more than 2,500 volunteers in workshops focused on phone banking for introverts, engaging those who say they don't vote, and using Spanish in our work. I've used Elizabeth's approach repeatedly in talking with people across the political spectrum, and many of the resulting conversations have been transformative. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and a warm welcome from all of us.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm so honored to be here today. And before we get started, I would just like to invite everyone to take a moment to acknowledge how much is going on in our country and the world right now, with the ICE courthouse arrests, the recent shooting in Manhattan, the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine and elsewhere, and so much more. I'd like you to just pause for a moment and acknowledge everything that's happening right now, and to also reconnect why the work that all of you are doing is so very important. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for channeling your energy into doing something to address the huge challenges before us right now. So, just a quick overview of today. We'll talk about how to engage in respectful, productive conversations with people you may disagree with or might have very different worldviews. We'll share some concrete tips and strategies for helping these encounters to go as well as possible. We'll demonstrate a sample conversation, give all of you a chance to practice, and then wrap up. And then afterwards, we hope that some of you can stick around for an optional question and answer period. If you haven't yet had a chance to print out the handout that we set in advance, now would be a great time to do that. It'll be really helpful for the practice sessions. So I'll just start with some context. Whether you're talking with strangers on a phone bank or having Thanksgiving dinner with your entire family, at some point you'll probably talk with someone who has a very different perspective. In these complicated times, the political divides in our country seem to be widening by the day. Bridging these divides is a huge challenge. In this 1 hour workshop, we can only give you a starter kit for productive engagement, but at the end of the workshop, we will share some other resources if you want to go deeper. But in our experience, using a few simple approaches can sometimes turn potentially volatile discussions into meaningful conversations, even if neither of you changes your mind. That is a real win when you consider how many powerful forces are trying to pit us against each other for their own profit and power. Everyone from Putin to social media to our current administration. These one-on-one conversations may seem minuscule compared to these huge efforts to divide and conquer us. But never underestimate the power of what thousands of these small connections can lead to over time. Even though it takes effort, talking with people who have very different perspectives has really broadened my horizons. Engaging with people outside my usual blue bubble has helped me gain a more nuanced understanding of issues and find out how implementations of policies I support can sometimes have unintended consequences. It's also allowed me to witness how other people can have good ideas and shared goals, even if we disagree about the best way to get there. To be honest, when I meet someone I disagree with politically, often my first reaction is to feel angry and judgmental. My adrenaline spikes as a torrent of opinions flash through my mind. Of course, if someone uses foul or threatening language, or is intoxicated, or is fixated on conspiracy theories, I just quickly end the conversation. But if none of those is true, and I just profoundly disagree with their viewpoint, I try to take a deep breath before responding. Instead of acting like a litigator, marching head on into a battle of facts, I can choose a different approach. Instead of entering these conversations thinking, how can I get them to change their mind? I try to ask myself, what can I learn from talking with this person that I didn't already know? It brings a totally different vibe to the conversation. And it also frees both of us from the burden of an unproductive power struggle about whose views are right. This is an opportunity also to be a brand ambassador for progressives and Democrats. While we may continue to disagree about politics, it's a win if I'm cordial, respectful, and thoughtful. For some people, I may be the first Democrat they've ever talked with about political issues. My goal in these conversations is not to change their mind or make them agree with me. Instead of trying to persuade them, I try to enter into respectful engagement. This requires some heavy duty emotional self regulation, but in my experience, it's worth it. By showing genuine interest in another person's perspective, it often lowers the temperature and helps them become more willing to hear my thoughts because I've demonstrated respect by hearing them out. That alone is not going to save our country, but it's a start to mending the torn fabric of our democracy. I'm going to turn the mic over to Carol, who has a moving story about this kind of engagement. Carol?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I'm hoping you can hear me. In December of 2017, I went to Salt Lake City to protest President Trump's proclamations reducing Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments. And after standing for a while with hundreds of protesters, I stepped away to use the restroom. And I overheard a nearby counter protester say, "I wonder if any of these people even vote." Whew, had to take a deep breath. And then I paused and turned toward the counter protester and said calmly, "I'm here protesting and I vote." That caught the man and his two companions, a man and a woman, off guard. The woman asked who I'd voted for, and when I said Clinton, she responded, "Did you think she was a winner?" "Yes," I responded still calmly, "I did." The group expressed some negative opinions about Clinton, and I listened for a bit, and then I chose to shift the conversation and ask why they thought the national monument should be reduced in size. The trio talked about what they saw as government overreach and mismanagement of federal lands, and their desire to keep Utah lands in local control. One man said that while working as a contractor on a government visitor center, he saw cost overruns and no thought about whether the center would bring in enough money to sustain itself. I said to him that I appreciated his work on the visitor center and acknowledged that I could understand his concern about cost overruns. I also mentioned that I didn't want to see national monuments reduced in size because they're part of our nation's heritage. The three of them acknowledged that our nation's heritage was very important to them too. And I went on to say that I'd been a National Park Service ranger, and I had seen over and over that public lands and our heritage are important to so many people. The three listened intently and they nodded. We talked about the roots of this caring in each of us, and we continued the conversation for about 10 minutes. As we wrapped up, each of the counter protesters shook my hand, and one of them said, "Keep up what you're doing. It's important."
Wow, I have tears coming to my eyes just hearing that story, Carol. As you can hear, Carol stayed calm even when the counter protester said things she clearly disagreed with. She also did a lot of listening, asking with genuine curiosity about why they thought the national monument should be reduced in size. She also acknowledged their concerns about cost overruns, found some common ground about the importance of our national heritage, and shared some of her personal experience as a National Park Service ranger. And the fact that the counter protesters actually shook her hand and even encouraged her to continue what she was doing is amazing. So now I'd like to share a story about an encounter I had while canvassing a Republican I'll call Ileana. When I asked her what three things she would change about the country if she were in charge, she said she'd stop teaching about non binary gender at her son's elementary school. My first reaction was outrage. Republicans use this as a wedge issue to distract us from their efforts to steal from the poor to give to the rich. It was tempting to launch into a lecture, but instead I took a deep breath. Whew. I mustered all the non judgmental curiosity I could scrape together and I said, Tell me more about that. Ileana thought it wasn't age appropriate to discuss this topic with her 10-year-old and thought it should wait until high school. I could have argued that that was too late. Bullying about gender identity starts way before then. But Ileana was giving me an opening. She didn't deny that non binary gender existed or think it was morally wrong. Then she said, when I complained, the school district told me I had no choice, and she bristled with anger at this top down approach. I tried to presume goodwill and to reflect back the best interpretation of what I heard her say. I said, it sounds like you think educating kids should be a partnership between the parents and the school. Ileana said, yeah, they should give parents options so they can choose whether their kid goes to non binary gender training or to a study hall instead. And then she added, it would be great to educate the parents, not just the kids. Again, I tried to channel non judgmental curiosity. I asked, what would be a good way to do that? Ileana said, well, they had a Zoom webinar for parents about how to prevent bullying. They could do something similar for non binary gender if parents wanted to learn more. I said, wow, that is a great idea. And it was. I had initially labeled her as intolerant and bigoted, but realized that I brought some of my own biases into this conversation before really hearing her out. If I had launched into my diatribe at the beginning, I would have totally missed out on this more nuanced conversation. After about 20 minutes, I thanked her for sharing her experience with me and then asked if I could share some information with her. She said yes, and I mentioned that I'd talked with people in another town where a middle school student had tragically taken their own life after being bullied, and how that sometimes happens when kids are different because of things like gender identity. I asked if she'd heard about this, and she said no. I didn't press the point, but I could tell she was thinking about it. At the end of the conversation, she thanked me several times for listening to her. She mentioned that she'd voted for my candidate before and would probably do so again. That was a bonus. My conversations with conservative voters don't always end that way, but they often thank me for hearing them out and sometimes even offer me a bottle of water. They tell me they appreciate my time and attentiveness, and that's a huge win, no matter how they vote. So, this conversation taught me three useful approaches for navigating challenging encounters. First, I try to remember that it's not my job to change someone else's mind. As activists who want to change the world, this may seem like heresy, but the more I lecture or argue, the less likely it is that someone will listen to me. Counterintuitively, the more I listen without defensiveness or anger, the more likely it is we'll have a productive conversation. Second, I try to understand their point of view rather than expecting them to understand mine. I try to bring non judgmental curiosity to the conversation. As we discussed in previous workshops, demonstrating empathy and reflecting back what you hear can go a long way towards helping people feel heard. One handy phrase that you've heard before is, tell me more about that. No matter what the situation, this buys you time and is a neutral, non judgmental invitation to share more with you. When Ileana told me she was upset that the school district teaching about, she was upset about the school district teaching about non binary gender, I said, tell me more about that. And she did. Another super useful phrase is, it sounds like fill in the blank. When Ileana expressed her anger at the school district telling her it was mandatory for her son to learn about non binary gender, I said, it sounds like you think educating kids should be a partnership between the school district and the parents. By reflecting back what I thought I heard her say, it lets her know that I'm really listening, not just waiting for my opportunity to seize control of the conversation. Keep in mind that listening and reflecting back what you hear does not mean that you agree with someone. It just signals that you're paying attention to what they have to say. You're not compromising your values by doing this. This is their opinion, not yours. But it does show that you're willing to earn their respect by making the effort to listen. The third helpful strategy is the pivot point in a conversation. This comes from our friends at Braver Angels, a group that promotes dialogue across difference. We'll share their website in our follow-up email. After I've really heard a voter out, there's often a natural pause in the conversation where I can pivot to sharing my thoughts. It might take 15 or 20 minutes or even longer to get there. Try not to jump the gun. Let them really have their say first. Well, how do I know when the moment's right to pivot? After people have a chance to really share their core concerns and feel heard, I might feel them calm down or start to speak more slowly or hear them take a deep breath. It can feel like what happens after a thunderstorm when the rain lets up and the sun might even peek out between the clouds. If I sense this change in the conversational weather, it can be a good time to pivot. It's really helpful to ask permission so they can actually opt in to hearing my opinion. With Ileana, after listening to her for 20 minutes or so, I said, "Thank you so much for sharing your experience with me and your great ideas for how to educate the parents as well as the students." Then I paused for a moment and said, "Would it be okay to share my perspective?" You might worry that by asking for consent, people will automatically say no. That's possible. But in my experience, if I've invested the time to really listen, they're willing and maybe even a little curious to hear what I have to say. I have never had someone tell me no. Maybe because that would seem rude after I've spent so much time listening to them. If they say yes, I share something from my own experience or something I've heard others in the community share with me, rather than jumping to a list of talking points and statistics. With Ileana, I told her what I'd heard about school bullying in another district. Depending on the situation, I could have also asked what she thought about what I shared with her. When we share a personal story, it moves the conversation away from a war of facts or an attempt to look like we're stating an absolute truth. This lowers the conversational temperature and makes it more likely that we'll hear what others are actually saying. I'll also mention that this conversational pivot may take a while, especially if you're talking with a friend or a family member rather than a one time phone bank conversation. So, when we are phone banking, we usually just have that one opportunity to speak with a specific voter. We can still make the most of it. In a moment, I'd like to demonstrate a sample conversation with a voter who thinks the cuts to Medicaid are a great way of reducing bloated government spending. I'm wondering if someone from the audience who happens to have a copy of the handout ready and can also have their video turned on would be willing to role play with me. I can be the caller and you can be the voter. If you could just go to the reactions tab and click raise hand, that would be amazing.
Elizabeth, could I just say that I had the workshop handout for workshop two in, so please ask people to double check to make sure they printed workshop three.
Thank you, Charlie. So we are talking about the handout for Workshop 3, Building Bridges, Starting Conversations Across the Political Divide. So if someone happens to have the handout for today's workshop handy and would be willing, you get to, if any of you have ever had these conversations, you can channel your grumpy neighbor, uncle, father-in-law. This could be fun. And I'll do my best to be a voter. I mean, sorry, the caller. Gordon, are you volunteering or are you just applauding? You're willing to play the grumpy voter? Let's see.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for stepping up to volunteer. So, just so if people want to follow along, I'm going to start with the script around the middle of page one. And then, Gordon, if you can kind of channel the voter. There's a few sample um, things that you could say there, and I'll try to follow the script. But then after a while, maybe we can just kind of continue the conversation organically. And then I know this may be a little bit early in a real conversation, but maybe if you could kind of give me a chance to try out the pivot, maybe 2 or 3 minutes into the conversation, just to show people what that looks like. Does that sound okay?
Sure. I'll
Okay.
try. I'll do my best.
Okay, all right. Well, all right. Ring ring.
Hi, who's calling, please?
Oh, hi. May I speak with Gordon, please?
This is Gordon.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Chur, and I'm a volunteer with Candidate X who's running for Congress. I'm just calling because her campaign wants to reach out to every voter to ask what issues are most important to you.
Well, I don't usually talk to Democrats. Is she a
Oh,
Democrat?
well, she is, but we're interested in talking with everybody. So I'm just really curious, what's most important to you?
Well, I don't talk to Democrats because I feel like they're ruining the country. They're just throwing money at people who don't want to work, don't want to do anything, and it's we're creating a huge deficit that we end up paying for. So I'm paying for that. And
Oh, I see. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about your concerns.
well, I have a brother who is does nothing, and it makes me beside myself. I feel like I might as well be giving him money for drugs or for, he just does nothing, and instead I pay my taxes and they give him my money.
Hmm. So it sounds like you think that it's not fair that you're working really hard and that your brother is kind of reaping some of the benefits of that.
Yeah, and it's not just my brother. There are lots of people like my brother.
Mm-hmm. What do you think would be a better way to kind of design a system that was fair?
Well, I think we should tax people less and that people should be more reliant on themselves.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that. How that would what that would look like.
Well, I think that we wouldn't have people who don't want to work being paid to not work.
Mm.
There are some people who can't work, and I think we need to support those people. But most of the people who are getting this money, it's immigrants, it's people who just choose not to do anything, not to
Mm.
work.
Uh-huh. Tell me more about I know you mentioned that it's sort of a wide range of folks that might be receiving support. I mean, you mentioned some people maybe who can't work. Tell me more about what you think those folks' lives are like.
Well, I'm sure they're hard. I'm sure it's hard. I mean, if I couldn't work, I don't know how I would survive exactly, but I think I would. I mean, I wouldn't expect the government to make up the difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing those thoughts with me, and I can understand your frustration. I'm wondering, would it be okay for me just to share a few thoughts that I have about that topic?
Okay.
Thanks. I share your concern about, the government deficit is definitely worrisome, especially for our kids and our grandkids who are going to inherit that. And at the same time, I know you mentioned that some folks aren't able to work, and I think, in my experience, there are quite a few people that might be struggling with different illnesses, long-term disability, and so on. And some of those folks, they've worked hard, they've paid into the system, and some of them have kids. And I'm just wondering, how do you think? What is our responsibility, especially to those children? It's not their fault that maybe their parent has become disabled, but how do you think we should be handling that?
Well, I don't really think about the kids when I think about this. I think about the parents. And
Mhm,
so I don't have a good answer to that. I don't know. I
mhm,
don't know. I mean, I do. I mean, the parents are responsible for those kids. They should be taking proper care of those kids. But, the kids themselves, should they be suffering? No, no. I mean, that doesn't feel quite right either.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that is, for me personally, part of my concern that there are a lot of people, and a lot of the people that are on programs like, Medicaid are children, actually. And I think that we do, as a country, have responsibility. They are really our future, and I think we have a responsibility to make sure that they get off to a good start and they can have the basics, and have a healthy childhood. And I think that for me, that's part of the reason that it's important to continue support for programs that can help ensure our future and make sure our kids really get off to a good start. And
We have to figure some way to pay for it though, and I feel like I can't. I'm barely getting by. So my feeling is, you know, I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but
Mhm.
I can't be doing it all.
Oh, I understand, and you shouldn't. That's a big responsibility. I think, this is a much wider discussion as well, but um, I think that there are some people that are very well off in our country, and they've benefited quite a bit from all of the wonderful things that the United States has. Our technology, our discoveries, our innovation, and I think that people who have done well, maybe become millionaires or billionaires, should be paying their fair share, not getting more money at the expense of the people that have the least, including children who maybe come from families that are struggling.
Well, I agree with you there. I think that it's what we do right now is not very fair.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Thank you. I'm going to call a timeout. This conversation could go on for quite a while, but thank you so much, Gordon. And I guess I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what was what was it like? I know this is maybe not how you actually feel, but you've done a great job in um, channeling this character, and I'm wondering what it was like to be on the other side of that.
Well, I was mostly trying to think of what I was going to say, to be truthful. I mean, so, I mean, it's weird arguing those arguments, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being game to to help demonstrate this, and I really appreciate your participation in this. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So now we would like to give all of you a chance to try this out. So in a few minutes, you'll get to practice these kinds of conversations in groups of 2 to 3. Many people tell us this is the most valuable part of the training. So I encourage you to participate. We'd like to invite you to take turns in the roles of caller, voter, and if you have a third person in your group, as the observer. Um, we'll prompt you to switch roles every 4 minutes so you can try out each of the roles, and you'll have 12 minutes altogether. Just remember, there's no need to be a policy expert, and we definitely don't expect you to get through an entire conversation. Instead, the focus of this practice is starting a conversation, getting used to managing that jolt of adrenaline when you encounter someone with very different beliefs, and trying to listen deeply to what they have to say using non-judgmental curiosity. And remember, your goal is not to get them to change their mind, but instead to better understand what is important to them and why. You can do this by using some of the techniques we discussed in the first 2 workshops. So that includes asking open-ended questions, which are questions that can't be answered with yes or no. You can also say things like, tell me more about that, and reflect back what you hear with phrases like, it sounds like fill in the blank. It sounds like that's really important to you. It sounds like you think that's inefficient, etc. On page 1 of your handout, about 2/3 of the way down, you'll see the script starts with the caller saying, hello, may I speak with Gordon, please? And then we've listed 4 things that the voter might say about Medicaid cuts at the bottom of page 1 and the start of page 2, and some possible responses that you as the caller could say in response that show non-judgmental curiosity and reflective listening. We sort of have a little formula like that sounds fill in the blank, and we put in a placeholder frustrating, but plug in something that's it requires you to listen to what the voter has to say, and then filling in the blank with something that is related to what they have shared with you. After you get through the scripted responses, we encourage you as the caller to continue listening and asking open-ended questions and reflecting back what you hear for another minute or 2. And if you sense the voter has finished expressing their core concern, maybe they start to speak more slowly or seem a little calmer, you can try pivoting. If you look on the middle of page 2 of the handout, there's suggested language for a pivot, such as, I can see you've thought a lot about this and you've got very clear ideas for solutions. I'm wondering if it would be okay to, and you could say, ask a question about a specific situation or share a few thoughts or tell you more about my personal experience with that. As the voter, if you feel like the caller has made an effort to really listen to you, go ahead and give them permission to share their thoughts. In real life, it would probably take a lot longer to get to this point, but for this breakout session, give them a chance to practice seeing how this feels. And since each practice conversation should last about 4 minutes, you probably won't finish the entire conversation. That's totally fine. If you don't have access to the handout, don't worry. Just try practicing the conversations in your small group based on the demo you just saw. It's kind of like real life and phone banking. There's always an element of improv and responding in the moment. We'll have a short debrief when we reconvene, and then we'll wrap up and have time for an optional Q&A. If you happen to end up by yourself in a breakout room or you have technical issues, just come back to this main room and we'll help you out. So we will see you back here in about 12 minutes. And we're just queuing up the breakout rooms, but they will be ready, and we'll wait for few more seconds until everybody rejoins us here. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the breakout sessions. I know that's not always easy, but I feel like some of the best learning comes from there. So we would just like to do a really quick debrief and invite you to put in the chat what's something that went well or something you learned from that practice session. If you could just put that in the chat, I'd love to hear. Yes, it sounds like some nice practice going on. Yes, to really listen to people, Michelle says. Personal stories were the thing that seemed to help change things. Yeah. Yes, always get really nervous, but it's always so useful. It's so true. Sherry, her conversation partner, asked a lot of good questions. It was actually really fun. Listen and ask for more information. Curiosity. Need to not jump in while someone else is talking. Working on the pivot. Yeah, I'll be sure to share your concerns is a nice way to wrap up. To be patient, not interrupt. Inspired by Jim's honesty and courage. Being vulnerable about being afraid helps. Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. Sounds like this is awesome. Yeah, control yourself, keep listening, not react judgmentally when someone says something extreme, like our president is the best president. Yes. Okay, fantastic. I wonder if you could put in the chat anything that was challenging or somewhere where you got stuck. I'd love to hear about maybe just opportunities for further practice or things that were difficult in that. Yeah, the pivot is hard. Yeah, the pivot is hard. And I think especially in this sort of artificial practice situation, normally we'll have more time. So it was a little bit challenging because you don't have a lot of time to work up to a pivot. But I think, let's see, yeah, I started to pivot a little too soon. Then I went back to asking more questions. I think that is a common thing, and it's really a practice to hold back on the pivot until, you can really sense that people have had a chance to stay heard, to be heard. Yes. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it sounds like maybe in your future conversations with family and friends and real voters that you might have opportunities to practice that pivot, maybe try out a few different approaches to see how that goes. So we're coming to the end of the workshop, but we have a few important things left. I'd love to share a story if we have time. And I'd also like to just share a few housekeeping items. So this is the first time we've taught a workshop on this topic, and we would really love your feedback. So we'll drop a link in the chat for a 2-minute survey. We do read every single comment and really appreciate your input for how to make it better. For more resources, videos, and information about my book, The Joy of Talking Politics with Strangers, you can visit my website, elizabethchur.com, and we'll drop a link into the chat. And to find out about my upcoming workshops and talks, both online and in person, you can join my Substack mailing list. Also, as I mentioned, we'll send some additional resources in the follow-up email if you want to deepen your skills or practice some more. Those include some online trainings by a group called Braver Angels, which helps foster productive discussions across the political divide. And there's also something called an Angry Uncle chatbot, which was created by political psychiatrist Dr. Karen Tamarius, where you can actually practice these conversations online with ChatGPT and get some real-time feedback on your technique. So I would now like to leave you with one last story. Last year, I knocked on the door of a voter in his early 30s, and he was incredibly cynical about Biden and how groceries and gas had gotten so expensive under the Democrats. He recited a litany of how disgusted he was with everything, and every time he'd have a refrain of, "It's ridiculous, it's ridiculous." Whew. I took a deep breath. I realized that he was angry, but he wasn't angry at me. It was more like he was disillusioned with how hard life was. I tried to reflect back what I was hearing, like, oh, it sounds like the price of groceries and gas going up has been really hard on your budget, or it sounds like you don't think things are going in the right direction right now. This was a lot of work, but he was happy to share his thoughts with me. And then he talked about how he didn't support the Democrats because they were for abortion and how women just use abortion so they can cheat on their husbands and cover up the evidence. Woo! I could have taken the bait and come in with a self-righteous argument. But instead, I took another deep breath and I asked him to tell me more. I listened until he seemed to have said what he needed to say. And then, in a pause in the conversation, I said, I wonder if I could share a few thoughts with you. He said, yeah, go ahead. So I said, I talked with a young mother who had two little kids. She wasn't feeling well and she went to the doctor and she found out she had an ectopic pregnancy. Do you know what that is? Yeah, it's a pregnancy complication and it can be very dangerous. Her doctor said she needed to end that pregnancy for health reasons. And if she had waited another day or two, her life might have been in danger. If she had lived in a place like Texas, she wouldn't have been able to get the health care she needed, and her kids could have lost their mother. I don't think that's right. They need their mom. It's such a personal decision, and I think women and their doctors should be the ones to decide, not the government. He dismissed that situation and said, that doesn't happen very often. And I said, I think it's more common than you might think. Often women are really sad or they just want to keep that private. They don't want everyone to know such a personal thing. He still poo-pooed that scenario, but I didn't push it. I was also starting to run out of patience and energy. And I know that sometimes less is more with these kinds of conversations. It's better to wrap it up before I lose it and say something I regret. So I said I should probably get going since the sun was going down. Then he surprised me by thanking me for listening and said, I don't really talk with many people about politics. I wish we could sit down for a couple of hours and really discuss some other issues. Although that was the last thing I wanted to do at that moment. I was touched. Even though we disagreed about a lot of things, he actually wanted to keep the conversation going. I thanked him for his time and I said goodbye. I didn't change his mind and he didn't change mine. But underneath his anger, disappointment, and cynicism, I could see that there was the wish to be heard and to connect. I can relate to that. I think deep down, most people want to be seen and heard. I'm glad I could be part of that. I hope that maybe the next time someone knocks on his door or calls him on a phone bank, maybe he'll remember this interaction, cut the next volunteer a little bit of slack, and maybe be just a little more open to hearing what they have to say. I think it's conversations like these that will slowly help rebuild the foundation of our democracy. And I'm so grateful that all of you are willing to be part of this challenging but vital effort. So now I will hand it back to Molly. She has some important announcements to close out the formal part of this workshop. And afterwards, we'll open it up for a few minutes of Q&A. Thank you all for being so generous with your time and attention today and for everything you are doing to protect our democracy. Thank you so much. Molly, I'd love to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So first, I would like to give a big thank you to Elizabeth Chur for coming and giving us a workshop today. She has done 3 amazing workshops, and this is the 3rd, and we hope that she'll come back and do a few more. But we've loved it, and it's posted on our YouTube channel. So you can go to our YouTube at Commit to Democracy, and you can watch all 3. Secondly, I would really like to thank Carol Blaney, who is our phone bank trainer and train the trainer. And she's done an amazing job working with Elizabeth to bring all of these workshops to fruition. Then I would also like to thank our team of moderators, Graham and Brad and Charlie, for being here today and making the magic happen. So again, we're committed to democracy. We are an organization. I'd like to let everybody know that we have 45 postcard hubs around the country, that you can order your postcards and actually be given a little bag with your postcards and your lists and your script. And we also do direct action, and we do phone banking, and we do an amazing amount of work. So if you don't have a political home, we would hope that this would be your political home. Now, I'd like to turn it back to Elizabeth for a Q&A. So let's keep the magic going, and whatever questions you have, you can put them into the chat and we can do a Q&A. So I'm going to bring Elizabeth back up to the stage.
Thank you so much, Molly. And yeah, I also just want to give a special shout out to Carol Blaney for being my partner. And you didn't hear as much from her, but she was instrumental in making this workshop and this whole series happen, as well as our Rockstar team, Graham, Brad, and Charlie, for working really hard behind the scenes to make it go so smoothly. So a big shout out to all of them. Thank you so much. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, if you just want to use the raise hand feature under the reactions tab, and we can have a few minutes for Q&A. Yeah, Charlie.
So Elizabeth, people are saying in the chat that they're getting the message that they already filled out the survey because they attended a different workshop. Is
Okay.
that the way it's supposed to work?
No, this should be a different survey, but I might have to work on that after the workshop, but we'll make sure that link is corrected for the follow-up email. So I'm so sorry about that, but we'll get it fixed because we would totally love your feedback. Thanks for letting me know. Diane, you have a question?
Yeah. What should we, or how should we use what we're learning here with a neighbor who seems to have gotten unfriendly since the election? We had all our signs up. Everybody in our neighborhood knows where we stand politically. And after the election, there's a neighbor who was friendly. We weren't close friends, but friendly. And there seems to be a political divide, and it's awkward whenever we bump into each other, but I don't know for a fact, and I don't want to just start talking about politics. So what do you advise in a situation like that?
It's such a great question. I think this is actually really important to be able to talk with people, even if we disagree, and maybe especially when we disagree or we voted differently. And so I don't know if it's possible maybe to just maybe go a little out of your way, like if you see them, just chat about something a little more neutral, like the weather, or maybe ask about how their tomato plants are doing or their grandkids or whatever. And maybe let them broach the political subject. Like, I don't think you need to bring that up. But I think what I've seen is part of what ails us as a country is that we're not even talking with people from the other side. And so then they get all of their information, from social media, or TikTok videos or other things that are not exactly designed to foster connection. And I think sometimes when people just have more exposure to other folks that might have voted differently. And I'm saying this also as a Democrat. I don't have a whole lot of Republicans in my life right now. But from canvassing and phone banking, I have talked with, more than I have in my usual life. And it's been really eye-opening to see that a lot of them actually want similar things that I do. And I really, really disagree with the candidates they voted for. And I don't believe their candidates are the ones that are going to bring us closer to that vision. But I think, I really believe strongly that this is actually part of how we are peacemakers, in a very small scale. So I think if it's possible, maybe and I think also it's sort of incumbent on us to take the first step around that. And some people may not want to talk to us, and that's okay. But I think also some of that fear that people have is that we're going to bite their head off or lecture them. And so, they might kind of proactively just try to protect themselves from, getting pounced on by a progressive, who's going to like rail against them. And I don't know if we can kind of indicate that we're, willing to still be a good neighbor to them. Like we would still jumpstart their car if they needed, or, lend them a cup of sugar. I know it sounds small in the face of what we're doing, but I think, if you multiply that across the country with like thousands and thousands of people, I think those small interactions actually do help. And then sometimes from small things like maybe more substantial or deeper kinds of conversations can arise if people feel safe, that they're not going to be immediately judged or lectured. Yeah, that's such a great question. Thanks, Diane. Janice, could you maybe just unmute yourself?
Yeah, there. Okay. You hear
Yeah,
me? Okay.
great.
Um, I have a question about like how to get this started on a phone bank. I've been phone banking for years and years and years, and I've done door-to-door canvassing, and I can see this working very well door to door. It's kind of hard to be that rude, when you're face to face with somebody, but on the phone, people have no problem just hanging up. So I don't know, how successful have you been with phone canvassing, trying to use this technique?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, if they hang up immediately, there's nothing I can do, right? But
Yeah,
sometimes people will say, I've had people say, you know, oh no, I'm, voting for the other guy, um, one thing, especially when I'm phone banking for maybe congressional candidate or state legislative candidate, they might,
right.
oh, I'm a Trumper, and I won't argue the point. I might be like, oh, okay, sounds like he's your guy, or and then
Yeah.
I'll maybe pause for just a second and say, I'm curious, are you usually a straight party line voter? Like, do you vote Republican all the way down the line? Or, because some people I've talked to, they kind of really go by the individual candidate. And some people really take pride in like, oh, I'm independent. I don't just vote a party line. Like, I really consider the merits of each individual. And, in some cases, like if I'm calling for a down ballot candidate, I'm less concerned about how they're voting for president, but
Yeah.
I would love to earn their vote for Congress or, the House of Delegates or whatever it is. And, it's sort of a way of, leaving that door open. And some people have, I mean, I've actually talked to a number of split ticket voters that way. So, if I don't take umbrage, and I can feel like sometimes especially when I identify as like a Democrat, then people have actually apologized, like, oh, sorry, like, I voted for the other guy, or, I'm sorry, I'm a Republican. I'm like, that's okay. Like, thanks for being a voter. I try to keep it kind of positive and non-judgmental, and people, because they're like, I can feel they're braced for me to attack. And it's
Yeah.
really interesting if I don't lead with that, but I still treat them like with dignity and respect. That not everybody, of course, but I think some percentage of people will be willing to talk with me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I just have one other quick question.
Yeah,
It isn't
please.
about this class, but you've mentioned, and I've done all of it, the
Mhm.
postcards and the
Yeah.
letters and all that. Do you have any stats on how effective that has been?
I think Molly has some information about kind of different effectiveness rates. I know it kind of ranges depending on which study it is, but Molly or Carol, would you like to share some of that?
Yeah, so this is Molly, so I can share a little bit of that. I'll just say that when you're at the door, that is the most effective way of reaching a voter and having them listen to
Absolutely.
you. So canvassing is top. So
Yeah.
if everybody on this call today gave canvassing just a little bit of a shot, it'd be super effective. Of course, we can't knock on every single person's door, and that's where the phone comes in. And so when you're talking to a voter, that's the next level. You get about a 2.5% bump in a race. And some of these races are really close. Like I was just looking at a sister district candidate today for Virginia. Last time she lost by 53 votes. So
Wow.
if you can get 2.5% of people voting who wouldn't have voted without your call, then that's definitely effective. Postcarding, it really depends, again, on which study, but Field Team 6 is reporting that 20% of the people who get a postcard to ask them to register to vote. And so that's a pretty good stat,
It
especially
is.
because you're sending postcards blindly. Um, and then texting, people can get a lot of different information texting. If you are a voter who doesn't regularly vote, you need 7 different touches to vote. So you might need a postcard, a phone call, a text. You might need to see an ad. There's an awful lot of things, ways that voters need to be reached. And so if we can be part of the solution and reach them in one of these ways, it's going to help. So it all helps. It really does. It works, or otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. And I know that individually, sometimes it feels like it doesn't work because maybe you only talk to 3 or 4 people in an hour. But if there's hundreds and thousands of us talking to 3 to 4 people in an hour, that's a lot of
Mhm.
people, and that
It
can
is.
bridge the gap. So I'm going to turn it back to Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Molly. I don't see any other questions. Unless somebody else has a question or comment, we can wrap it up. Thank you all for sticking around afterwards, for participating. This is a tough topic, but I think it's really worthwhile. And also just remember, these techniques can work not only for phone banking and canvassing, but with neighbors, with family members, and I think um, it's it's an opportunity really to help um, bridge these divides that have been very intentionally fostered. And I think it feels like a lot of work, but I really feel like this is such an important part of our way forward, of being able to have conversations, difficult, challenging conversations with people, to really, create to reweave some of those connections that bind us together. It's just such important work. So I commend all of you for showing up here. Some of you have been here for all 3 workshops, and it's been so great to be in community with you. And I hope that some of these tools will be helpful in your future conversations and the really incredible work that you're doing. So thank you all so very much. I am in awe. I'm inspired by all of you, and I'm so honored to be in community with all of you. And thank you to Commit to Democracy for hosting and for just making this possible. Thank you so much. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.